Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming back. For those of you who are back for the new year, and then for the new people, thank you for coming. My name is Adunni, and I'm the chef and owner of Taste Tutor LLC. We're a company that provides culinary consultations in the form of cooking classes like this one. We also have seasoning blends available for sale online at thetastetutor.com. And I did put the website in the chat so you guys can look through there, get all the free recipes, blog information, travel information. There's garden tips now, and then all the links to the social media platforms. So this session, like Jasmine said, is being recorded. So if you could, please mute your mic. But if you have questions, it's really fun and informal. So just unmute and you can ask whenever, or you can put those in the chat. And then a copy of the recipe will be provided to you if it hasn't already. So today we're going to be making, let me pull my recipe up. Low Country Hoppin John with okra and sweet plantain fry. So it's kind of a complete departure from the traditional Hoppin John, but we're adding a little razzle dazzle to it. It'll be fun. It'll be healthy, of course. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. But before I begin, are there any questions? Nope. Okay, well, I'm going to flip my camera so you can see the food and what I'm doing. And just give me a second to do that and we will get started. So again, we're making the Hoppin John with okra and sweet plantain stir fry. And I'm going to go over all of the ingredients first, and then we'll get started prepping. But a little bit of history or folklore around Hoppin John. So basically, the story goes that there was a man in South Carolina selling rice and peas, or beans and rice, or whatever you want to call it. And he had a little hobble to his walk. So then they named the dish Hoppin John because his name was John. And then to take it even further, they said his wife was named Susan, and there's a counterpart dish that's rice and okra, and they call that Limpin' Susan. So it's Hoppin John and Limpin' Susan. So we're taking the ingredients from those, adding a ton more vegetables. We're making it plant-based because if you've been here before, you know that's my jam. And we are going to cook it in a different way. So traditionally, if we were going to make the black-eyed peas, I do have a recipe for making them from scratch in the recipe that I provided, but it's also easy enough to just buy some black-eyed peas for the application that we're doing, since we're mixing it with a bunch of other stuff. It's not going to be the main part of the dish, just part of it. So you can follow that, but basically you would make some sort of meat broth using smoked turkey or ham hock or something like that, and then cook your beans down in it. And once the beans are soft, then you would add your rice and cook it all together to make kind of a one-pot dish. So that's how you would normally make it, but that's how we're going to do today. So today we're going to add a bunch of different vegetables. So we've got our black-eyed peas, and I've already got some brown rice cooking on the stove. 1 cup of brown rice with 2 cups of vegetable broth, just because it takes quite a while to cook. So that's sitting on the stove. I've got kale, I've got tomato, I've got green pepper, onion, garlic, celery, green onion, and then these are plantains. So you might think this looks really weird and why is it black? So if you ever go to a Caribbean restaurant or anything like that where they have the sweet plantains, they're going to be using them at this stage when they've gone almost black, because that's when they're the most sweet. So if you get the super yellow ones, they're going to be a little bit tougher, not as soft, not as sweet, but still kind of sweet. And then the green ones are going to be just a plain starchy banana flavor. So that's why we're using these, because we want them to be sweet. So I bought these about 2 weeks ago from Winco, and they were starting to be yellow. Some of them were a little bit green. And then I just let them sit out on the counter for them to get this dark. And we're going to use these. So I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to start prepping everything. Set this aside as well. So got one more ingredient that we're adding. I've got some frozen okra here. And I usually just buy okra frozen if I can't find it fresh or if it's not in season. So I've got that, which I'm going to set to the side as well. And we're going to start prepping our vegetables. So we'll start with our onion. And what I like to do, since this one is so big, I'm going to cut it in half and only use a quarter of it. So cutting it down the center. I'm going to reserve that. And then cut it down the center again. And reserve that. And then get rid of the skin. So I'll just cut the two ends off like that. And then once you've prepped everything, it's really simple to put it all together. But of course, the prep takes a little bit of time. So what you could do to speed that up is in the produce section, they do sell already chopped up onions and garlic and all that stuff. If you really want to make like a quick weeknight meal, you can do that. So I'm just cutting it into strips, turning it around, and then dicing it. I'm gonna do the same with the rest of them. Now, if I were cutting the whole onion, I would have left the root on and cut the strips that way so that I could keep all the strips in one spot under more control. But since I'm only doing a quarter of the onion, this is fine as well. So we've got that done. And then we're gonna do we've already got our yellow bell pepper prepped here, but I'm gonna do my green pepper, and I only need half of that. So I'm just gonna cut that in half. And there's a little nub down here that I don't want. And then we're gonna get rid of all of these seeds. So what I do is I just grab it and pull it out and then toss this part. And then pull out these stems or these membranes in here. So you waste kind of minimal pepper rather than cutting off the whole top of it. And then what I like to do is just flatten it with my palm so that I have a flat surface to work with instead of having those ridges, again, because we don't want to waste any of that. And we're slicing in the same manner that we did the onion. And then we're going to dice it. And the great thing about having all of these different vegetables like the bell pepper and the okra and the kale is we're getting a bunch of different colors, which means we're getting a bunch of different nutrients in our food. So for example, the bell pepper has a surprisingly high amount of vitamin C, which of course is great for your immune system. So that's wonderful. And then we're gonna do the celery. So I've got one stalk of celery here. It's pretty small. So I'm gonna use the whole thing, and then I just like to cut off this top part and toss it. And you can always omit any of the vegetables if you don't like them. I like celery, but like just a tiny bit. That's why we're using such a little bit for this recipe. So we've got celery and then fresh garlic. So I've actually got some garlic that has peels on it because normally I buy the garlic that's already peeled, but for some reason they were out for a while in the store. So I will show you finally in real life how to peel the garlic. So basically I just take one and there's still that part where it's connected to the root. So I'm just going to cut that off. And then to peel it, all you do is take your knife, smash it, and then the peel should come off relatively easily. Like that.
Thanks for that tip. I also have in the chat that Isabel loves a tip with the bell pepper. So thanks for showing us how to cut up the vegetables.
Good. Yeah, I figure it's a lot of, that's one of the parts of cooking that I hear a lot of people say they don't like is chopping all the vegetables and the prep. And of course, you can have the appliances to do all that stuff like the food processor, but you don't have as much control of the size of the things that you're cooking. And one other tip is when you're cooking like vegetables or you're cutting vegetables for soup or any type of dish, try to get them to be the same size because that means they will cook at the same rate. So like if you were to have small pieces of onion and large chunks of bell pepper, your onion would be soft and then your bell pepper would be super crunchy. And unless you like that, I mean, I guess that's fine. But if all your vegetables are around the same size, they'll cook relatively at the same time. So you get a consistent texture and have more control of the textures in your food. So for the garlic, it says to mince it. So I'm going to slice it and then dice it again. Like so. And then if you're mincing, you want to go over it like a few more times so that you get the pieces super small. And that's a general rule for all things. Like if you're mincing parsley or cilantro or something like that, you'll just go over it a few times just to get it really small. And I think that's small enough. And then one other tip with garlic is the smaller you cut it, so the smaller the pieces are, the more pungent the garlic flavor is going to be in the dish. So if you wanted just a hint of garlic, you could use the same 3 cloves and just slice it or leave it whole, and it would deliver a lot less garlic flavor than if you were to mince it. And that's obviously because you're breaking the cell walls in the garlic, which is releasing a lot of that flavor and oil and everything. So that's why you're getting more flavor from smaller pieces of garlic. All right, so we've got those. Let's go ahead and do all the vegetables and then we can do the plantain. So I've got a handful of kale here and the recipe calls for 1/2 cup. So this should be around 1/2 cup once I cut it up, but I'm just gonna roughly chop this so that there's nice bite-sized pieces throughout the dish once we add it towards the end. And I like to go ahead and include some of those stalks just because you always want extra fiber. All these vegetables and kale specifically are really great sources of fiber. So that's obviously good for your digestive system. It helps to keep you fuller longer so that it sustains you, doesn't really spike your blood sugar because we don't want that. And then for the tomato, we're gonna dice that. I like to get rid of the juice in the tomato. I'm just gonna cut off this little end. I like to get rid of the juice in the tomato for this particular recipe because I want it to be a little bit more dry. So all I'm gonna do is cut it in half and then take my knife and kind of scrape out those seeds. And you're not gonna get all of it, obviously, but try your best to get as much as possible out. And we'll do this other side. And then if you wanted to make a lot more for a larger family or something like that, you could always just double the recipe. So for the tomato, I'm just gonna do the same slicing motion. And see, we've still got some seeds in there, but that's okay. It'll be relatively dry. And then we're gonna dice into small dices, like so. I think we've got all of our stuff nicely prepped. So what I'm gonna do is try to move all of this over so that we can do the plantain, because we were gonna peel it first and then we're going to dice it. And the recipe calls for making this Hoppin John first, but in the effort to use just one pan, I'm going to fry the plantains first, set those aside, then char the garlic or char the okra, set that aside, and then assemble everything. So it's less dishes. Just 1 second. I think I saw something in the chat, but I missed what it said.
It says, I don't like all the prep work, but it's best for me. I've purchased them packaged from the store and the taste is not as fresh and it has a plastic taste. That's from Callie.
Okay. Well, one thing you could do is, rather than having a prep for each meal every time, you could just buy all of your veggies and then spend a few hours prepping a bunch just so that they're ready. And then whenever you want to make a meal, you just pull out your already chopped onions, tomatoes, all that, and do that for the rest of the week rather than having to prep each time.
That's a good idea. I have a question, Adunni, just regarding, cutting up your veggies or fruit in advance. I've read that some people actually put their fruit and vegetables in mason jars to keep them more fresh. Do you do any of that, with your own fruits and vegetables, or how do you keep them most fresh after they're cut up?
Well, for all of my herbs and stuff, I put them in mason jars with water, just sitting face up. You can do that with celery as well, so that it continues to have some sort of source to be fresh. And then you could do the mason jars, but you could also just put it in glass Tupperware. That works as well. And that's what my mom does too. And the glass kind of keeps everything more fresh. But then for things like berries and stuff and grapes, I like to wash them and keep them in the container that they come in, just because that air circulating helps to keep them fresh longer rather than the air in the glass just circulating around and making it go bad faster. Right. Because whatever the gases are being released from that fruit is starting to ripen the fruit more, so it kind of goes bad faster. I don't know if you notice, like when you wash strawberries, they go bad really fast, but then when you just leave them and wash them as they go, they seem to last a little bit longer. So that's my theory for why that happens. But we'll see.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question about like if I do my prep work, in order to keep it from discoloring, if I do it for the week, someone has told me about, I've even tried lemon juice to keep it from discoloring. Is any validity to that?
Yeah, so certain fruits and vegetables, they turn brown after they've been cut. And that's just because, again, once you're disrupting that whole fruit, whatever that enzyme is starts to work and starts to brown the fruit or the vegetable. So yeah, you could do anything acidic really. So lime juice, lemon juice, you could try vinegar, but lime juice and lemon juice kind of taste better. So yeah, that does actually work. And then another thing is trying to limit the amount of air that the fruit or vegetable is exposed to. So for example, if you are cutting up an avocado, let's say, and then you only use half of it, what I would do is rub lemon juice or lime juice on that other half, but leave the seed part in there and like wrap it really tightly with plastic wrap so the plastic touches the cut part, and that helps to keep it from turning as brown in the fridge. So that's just an example of that. So for the plantain, we're just going to cut off both ends, and it might look a little wonky inside because they've ripened so much, but it's going to be good. Don't worry. So this calls for 2 large plantains. So I cut both ends off, and then just take your knife and then run it down the skin, and that helps make it easier to peel off.
And I just have in the chat here from Isabel. She said, I like the ripe sweetened plantains, but sometimes they have hard spots that appear different. Is the plantain still good?
Yeah, the plantain is fine. I just cut that part out. Because I have one over there that has those hard spots. I didn't use that one for the purposes of this demo, but yeah, I just cut that part out. And sometimes the whole thing is hard, and if the whole thing is hard, I would go ahead and toss that one, just because it's not really as palatable to eat, but that's perfectly fine to cut it out. Because another thing we want to try to mitigate is food waste. So because it's an organic product and it's from nature, it's not always going to be perfect, even when it ripens. And I think when when we go to the store, all the fruit and vegetables look really pretty, and like all the ones that are ugly are usually skipped over. But a lot of times they're perfectly fine to eat. So that's just another thing that would be kind of cool to implement if you happen to have some veggies or fruit that are not as perfect looking. If you cut them open and see what they look like on the inside, it could be fine. And that would also save some money. So I'm just slicing them down the center and then slicing them again, because we want little like nuggets of plantain. So we've got our strips, and then we're gonna turn them to the side, and they're really soft, so that's why it looks kind of weird to work with. But I can tell these are gonna be really sweet because I can smell them too. And I've even seen people make, so like, you know how there's banana bread recipes? I've seen people make plantain bread when the banana, or excuse me, the plantain is super duper ripe. So that could be cool to try as well with your normal banana bread recipe. Okay. Oops, I lost one. So now we're ready to start assembling everything. So what I'm gonna do is scooch you guys over so we can start to fry our plantain. Okay. So typically, if I were doing a lot, I would deep fry them rather than shallow fry them, but we want to try to limit the amount of oil we're using anyway. So I'm just going to shallow fry them and then use the oil that's remaining to do the rest of my cooking. So because this is such a big pan, I'm turning the heat on to about medium high, and then we'll turn it down to medium when the oil heats up. And this is just regular vegetable oil or canola oil, whatever you've got is fine. I would probably not use olive oil to fry in, just because it doesn't have such a high smoke point and it can burn a little bit faster than one of the regular vegetable oils. So, plus olive oil is a little expensive too to be frying with, but for cooking and for salad dressings and stuff, it's really great for you because it's got a lot of nutrients in it and it's got good fats. So we'll let that heat up. Let me set up my little basket for my fried plantain. All right, so all I've got is just a bowl with some paper towel to set it in once it's finished frying. And I think I'm gonna try to do this in 2 batches because it should go relatively fast. So we can talk a little bit about some of the nutrients in some of these things. So for kale, there's a lot of calcium and potassium in them, which is surprising because it's hard to get those things from non-animal products, but kale is a great source to get that calcium from. And then vitamin C in the tomatoes and the bell peppers is really great for your immune system again. Now, typically I would add a habanero pepper to this just because I like spicy food, and that can help clear your sinuses if you've got anything going on in there. The plantains are actually a complex carb, so they're more akin to like the health benefits of a sweet potato or something rather than a white potato or like white rice. So that's something good to keep in mind. They've also got a lot of potassium in them. And then the okra and the brown rice and pretty much all these things are great sources of fiber. So again, they help keep you regular, help with your digestion and all that kind of stuff. So it's always good to incorporate a bunch of veggies. And the reason why we're pairing the beans and the rice is because of the combination of the two having all of the essential amino acids, which are the building blocks for protein. So rather than eating like a piece of chicken or something to get your complete protein, you can mix those two things like beans and corn, beans and rice, anything like that, so that you get parts from one, parts from the other, and then you're not having to eat animal products, which I still really enjoy, like shrimp and goat meat and stuff like that, but I just try to limit it for health reasons and just because the people in my home don't eat meat. I'm the only one. So yeah. All right, so let's test this out and see. Okay. I think we can start to add. I'm just adding it and breaking it up. And we're not going to add too much at a time because we want the oil to stay at a consistent hot temperature so that we aren't cooling it down too much and so that the plantains fry evenly. So that's about half of what I cut up. I'm going to let that cook. And you kind of have to keep an eye on it just because there are a lot of sugars in the plantain. So if you walk away, it could burn relatively easily. So that's why I said to turn the heat down to medium. I'm just going to keep stirring it around and try to get it to cook evenly on both sides. And if you can see when you can tell it's done when it starts to get more of a vibrant yellow. So some pieces are still that beige color, and then some are the vibrant yellow color. So let me adjust this here. Okay. We'll just keep stirring that around. And then we'll probably have to drain off some of this oil just because this is quite a bit of oil to actually consume. So that's okay. Do we have any questions while I'm doing this?
If you have any questions, you can drop it in the chat or just take yourself off mute and let us know.
So this pan is a cast iron pan with like a ceramic coating on the outside. And cast iron is really good for frying or general cooking just because it conducts heat really well and it keeps everything cooking evenly. So that's what I like to use. They are really heavy though, so if you're trying to flip things out, it's kind of a wrist workout. But any pan will pretty much work. So if you do non-stick or stainless steel or anything like that, that'll work fine. Okay, so it's starting to get, some of the pieces are starting to get a little darker. And we just want to cook it through so that there's no more of that raw plantain flavor. It doesn't need to be crunchy or anything like that, because it's going to go back into the finished dish. We've got about 25 minutes left. So I've got the rice still working. I put it on at about 9:48. So, and I tasted it a few minutes ago and it's still a little bit hard. So brown rice does take quite a bit longer to cook. At least it does for me. 40 to 60 minutes, just because the brown rice has, unlike white rice, it has all of the parts to it. So it has the hull, the germ, the endosperm, all of it is still there that you have to basically break down. But the good thing about that, again, is there's a lot of fiber in those pieces that we don't necessarily get in white rice. So sometimes, you know, I like to switch it up with the brown and the white, but white rice is my favorite. Parboiled of white rice is usually my go-to, but if I'm trying to be a little bit more healthy, then I will do a brown rice or something like that.
And Adunni, earlier you mentioned you cook your brown rice with vegetable stock.
Oh, yeah.
Why do you do that instead of water?
This one, I like this one for cooking rice, but any one will really work. So I like it just because it adds a little bit more flavor. And usually if there's a recipe that calls for something cooked in water, I'll just go ahead and default to vegetable broth or chicken broth or whatever, because, you know, you're adding another layer of flavor rather than just water. But obviously water is a little bit less expensive. Well, a lot less expensive. So you can use that if a recipe calls for that. Of course. So all I'm doing is taking them out before they burn. I burnt a few plenty of times, so I'm trying to be proactive here.
And I have from Cherish, oh, sorry. I have from Cherish in the chat. She said, sometimes I mix white rice with quinoa since I love white rice so much, but want a little bit more nutrients.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
So later on, and I'm just going to do the second batch here. Later on, I forgot which month it was, we're going to be doing a grain 101 and a legumes 101, or like a beans 101. And we'll just be diving deep into the nutrients that you can get from different grains. And I think it'll be interesting to see, we're going to make a jambalaya with different grains rather than rice. Again, a departure from the traditional, but we're trying to be healthy here. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes out compared to like a regular rice jambalaya. And we'll be looking at some different grains, which I can give you a preview while these are frying in my grains cabinet here.
And I think I cut someone off earlier who was trying to speak. Callie, was that you?
Well, yes, I was going to ask about the storage of brown rice, because I read that it doesn't store for a long time. I've read that. I don't know if that's true, because I've only bought it in a very small package, because it does. I don't usually have an hour to get brown rice to cook. But say if I bought some from Costco, just FYI, what's the, in terms of storing, does it go bad or what?
Well, it depends on how sensitive you are to the flavor. So because the whole thing is there, all of the different oils that come from the grain are there. And that's the same with any whole grain. So like whole wheat flour or any whole grain really. So it's gonna like have a little bit of an oxidized flavor if it's kept for too long. But what I do with brown rice or other rices that are, or other grains that are whole, I just buy them in smaller quantities just because they don't last as long. And I store them in mason jars like this, just to help keep kind of an airtight situation as much as possible. So some of the, like, well, clearly I don't have that much left of the brown rice, but I really like rice. So you see there's a lot of different kinds of rice here, but some of the things we'll look at are like fonio, which is like it's from West Africa and it's a really small grain, but it has an interesting porridgey kind of flavor. We'll look at sorghum, which you can make like syrup out of. You can make little bitty popcorn out of it. Obviously, we'll look at some quinoa. We'll look at brown rice, and we'll look at some different kinds of black rice, all different kinds of things. Oh, and even wild rice during our Grains 101, so that we could just really delve into and learn what other kinds of things we could be working with as an ingredient when we're trying to make grain-based dishes. So back to our plantains here. I'm just pulling them off. I've turned off the heat. I'm pulling them out. And then I'm gonna do my okra. Okay. All right, so here's what we've got for fried plantains, and we'll let those drain while we prep everything else. Okay, so for the oil, there's a lot in here, and I'm gonna, to prevent everything from splashing and popping, I'm gonna pour some of this oil out into a separate container and then come back. So give me just 1 second to do that. Okay. So that was a very heavy exercise there. So we'll turn our heat back on to medium, and the oil should be hot enough now. So I will go ahead and add just a little bit of okra. This is about 5 ounces. You can obviously add more if you want more. And all we're doing with this is allowing it to char a little bit. And what that does is it adds a depth of flavor to the okra, but it also helps to reduce that sliminess if you don't like that sliminess. It helps it so you're just getting okra flavor, okra texture, and not all the mucusy stuff, which is good for you, and it helps kind of clean you out and everything, but some people just don't like that texture. And I've got the heat on medium high. And I'll just keep stirring it I don't know if you can see all that mucus as I'm stirring it, but that'll be gone soon. Do you have any other questions? Let me look in the chat. Okay, let me check it. So it's taking a little bit longer to char just because it's trying to do it from frozen. But we'll give it time to do that. And what you could do is push one section of the, make one section of the pan for charring and one section of the pan for actually cooking all the veggies and stuff, which I think I'm gonna do because we only got about 14 minutes left. So I'm gonna scoot all this over and start doing the rest of the veggies while this chars. Okay, so we've got our, we're gonna use the residual oil and I'm gonna go ahead and add all of my peppers, onions, and garlic and let that cook down. Like so. And the rice, I just tasted it. It's pretty much done, but I'm gonna let it sit until right before we're ready to add it. And our yellow bell pepper goes in as well. There's some of the okra, and it's starting to get there. Let me show you. It's starting to get a little bit brown. So that's kind of what we want. And the mucus is starting to reduce quite a bit. So that's good. Okay. So go ahead and stir all your veggies. And at this point, it kind of comes together like how you would make fried rice, where you're adding your veggies and all your ingredients, basically your seasonings, your rice, and letting it all cook together. So we'll let that cook down. And we want these to cook till they get just a little bit soft. They don't have to be all the way soft. But we want to get just a little bit of color on these, like a little bit of browning. Okay. Let's check on our okra. Oh yeah, okra. I'm gonna call the okra good. So typically what I would do is take this okra out so I have more room to do the rest of my veggies. So let me do that. And the only reason I'm taking it out is because I don't want it to get like too mushy. Because that kind of defeats the purpose of doing the charring. And then when okra cooks for a super long time, it starts to get like more of like a greenish, grayish color, greenish, grayish brown. So we want vibrant colors in our finished dish. So I'm gonna set that aside. Okay. And I'm gonna turn this down to medium. And now we're going to add some of our seasonings and then our rice and our beans. So we're going to be adding 2 of our Tutor seasonings. So this is seasoning 101, and it's the all-purpose that we use for everything. This is the Gullah seasoning. That's kind of like a low country flavor. And if you're subbing the recipe for any of these, you want to use start with about half or a quarter of the amount of like a store-bought seasoning, because those have a lot more salt in them than what we make. And these are available on the tastetutor.com. So I'm just going to add, this is going to be fast. I'm going to add my seasonings in. That was a tablespoon of both the Gullah seasoning and the seasoning 101. And my rice is done. So I'm going to go ahead and add the rice. That's what it looks like. And then you'll see like there's a little bit of the vegetable broth color in there, which is good because that's an indication of more flavor. So we'll add our rice in there. And we will add our beans in there, black eyed peas. And again, you can make them from scratch. And what I do is sometimes I'll make a whole big crock pot from scratch and then portion them out into mason jars. And that recipe freezes really well. So when it's time for rice and peas or beans and rice, you can just put the mason jar in some warm water, not hot water, just some warm water just to loosen it and start to thaw it out. And then dump the beans into a pot and reheat them. So it's kind of like meal prep. Well, what people call meal prep now. My mom used to do that when we were little. She would just make a bunch of meals on Sunday and then we'd eat them throughout the day or throughout the week because she worked. So she wasn't really cooking every night. But she did teach us how to like heat up stuff. So that was kind of the beginning of all this, heating up crinkle cut fries and vegetables from the bag and all that stuff. So where it all started.
I noticed you cook your rice uncovered. Is that because most of the time I see they say cover it? So why did you cook yours uncovered?
Oh, I cooked it covered. I just was showing you what it looked like. So when I cook rice, any rice, what you want to do is add your rice and your liquid. And if you can wash your rice to help get rid of some of the starches. But also if you are going to skip that step, if you put your rice in with your liquid and you don't stir it at all throughout the whole process of cooking, you'll still get individual granules of rice. So it won't be like it won't come out like a sticky rice. So yeah, you cover it, keep it really, really tight with a lid. A lot of times if I'm making rice that's steaming and doesn't have as much liquid in it, I will cover it with a piece of foil first and then put the lid on so that the seal is a lot tighter. Just to make sure that you don't have to stir it one and that all of the granules get properly steamed. Okay, so we've added our beans, we've added our rice. Does that answer your question? I will assume yes. Now we're going to add our kale and our diced tomatoes. So we're pretty much done with this after we do these. Diced tomatoes. And what we're adding this at the very end just because we want the tomato to still have a little bit of life to it, and the kale too. And so we'll stir that in. Probably turn this to low. Stir that in. Let the kale wilt down a little bit in there. And it turns out to be a lot of food, even with just 1 cup of rice and 1 can of beans. So I think this could feed 4 people. You can always add more kale or more of any of the vegetables too. Yeah, this could feed 4 people and maybe you can have some leftovers. And then the last thing we're gonna do is add back our okra and our plantains. I just took the paper towel out of the bowl. And we'll just add them like so. And just stir it all together.